The Young and the Restless Spoilers, the end of Sharon's ordeal. The story of Sharon had dragged on for what seemed like an eternity. Fans had grown weary of the repetitive scenes of her captivity, endless shots of her crying, screaming, and begging for freedom. They wanted closure, and it was finally time to deliver it. The miraculous discovery: Nick had been relentless in his search for Sharon, his heart refusing to believe she was lost forever. Days had turned into weeks, and hope had begun to wane, but then, as if by divine intervention, he stumbled upon a clue. A note, barely legible, hidden in the belongings of one of Jordan's accomplices, hinted at a location, a remote, decrepit building on the outskirts of the city. Without hesitation, Nick raced to the address, his mind spinning with desperation and dread. The building was a fortress of rusted metal and crumbling concrete, a fitting representation of the nightmare Sharon had endured. He called out her name as he wandered the halls, his voice echoing off the empty walls. Then, through the suffocating silence, a faint sound reached his ears. Nick. Sharon's voice was hoarse but unmistakable. Nick, I'm here. Nick froze, his heart pounding. Tears streamed down his face as he followed her voice to a thick iron door bolted shut. He pounded on it with his fists, shouting her name. Sharon. I'm here. I'm going to get you out. The iron door. Sharon's sobs came from the other side. Nick, I'm so scared. Please, hurry. Nick examined the door, his hands trembling. It was reinforced, the kind of door that wouldn't budge without industrial tools. But Nick wasn't about to give up. Fueled by love and determination, he threw himself against it, over and over, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. It's too strong, he muttered, his frustration boiling over. He kicked the door, cursed, and searched for something, anything, to break it down. But before he could act further, he heard footsteps behind him. The final showdown. Nick spun around just in time to see Jordan emerge from the shadows, her face twisted in a wicked grin. In her hand, she held a knife, its blade gleaming under the dim light. You just don't know when to quit, do you? She sneered. Get out of my way, Nick growled, his voice filled with a fury that even surprised himself. This ends now. Jordan laughed, the sound cold and unnerving. Oh, you're right. It does end now. But not the way you think. Before Nick could react, Jordan lunged at him, the knife plunging into his side. Pain exploded through his body, but he didn't fall. Gritting his teeth, he grabbed Jordan's wrist, twisting it until the knife clattered to the floor. You're not stopping me, he said through gritted teeth. With a surge of strength, Nick pushed her away and delivered a blow that sent her sprawling to the ground. Jordan groaned, her strength finally giving out. She lay motionless, her reign of terror brought to a definitive end. Freedom at a cost. Ignoring the pain in his side, Nick turned back to the door. He found a piece of metal nearby and used it to wedge open the lock. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open. Sharon stumbled out, her face pale and tear-streaked. Nick, she cried, throwing her arms around him. I thought I'd never see you again. Nick held her tightly, his body trembling with relief. You're safe now, he whispered. You're safe. But the embrace was cut short as Nick staggered, clutching his side. Sharon gasped when she saw the blood soaking through his shirt. You're hurt, she exclaimed, her voice filled with panic. I'm fine, Nick insisted, though his legs wobbled beneath him. We need to get out of here. A bittersweet escape. Sharon helped Nick as they stumbled out of the building, the cold night air hitting them like a blessing. The distant sound of sirens grew louder, signaling that help was on the way. Sharon tried to keep Nick talking, to keep him conscious, but his breaths were shallow, and his strength was fading fast. Stay with me, she pleaded. Please, Nick, don't leave me now. As the paramedics arrived and rushed Nick onto a stretcher, Sharon held his hand tightly, refusing to let go. You saved me, she said, her voice breaking. You brought me back. Nick managed a weak smile. I told you. I'd never give up on you. A new chapter in the days that followed, Nick underwent surgery to repair the damage from Jordan's attack. The road to recovery was long, but Sharon never left his side. Their bond, forged through pain and perseverance, was stronger than ever. As for Jordan, her fate was sealed. She faced charges for kidnapping, attempted murder, and a laundry list of other crimes. Her reign of terror had come to an end, leaving behind a trail of destruction but also a chance for those she had hurt to rebuild their lives. For Sharon and Nick, the ordeal was finally over. It hadn't been without sacrifice, and the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain. But they had survived. And together, they began the difficult but hopeful process of moving forward, ready to leave the darkness behind and embrace the light of a new beginning. This conclusion ties up Sharon's storyline with finality while adding emotional weight and character growth for Nick, Sharon, and even Jordan. It's a mix of tragedy, triumph, and hope that allows the audience to move on while feeling the impact of the events. The escape of Jordan, a villain's return. Sharon's tears streamed down her face as she sat helplessly beside Nick, his body weak and drenched in blood. His breaths were shallow, his skin pale. Panic gripped her heart, and her mind raced for solutions. The abandoned building was eerily silent, and Sharon's cries for help seemed to vanish into the void. Jordan, unconscious but still alive, was chained to the wall. A temporary victory that Sharon knew could unravel at any moment. Fear clung to her like a shadow. If Jordan woke up, she might retaliate. Sharon's only priority was Nick, but she couldn't leave him vulnerable if Jordan regained her strength. A desperate plea for help. Sharon screamed into the darkness, her voice hoarse from desperation. "Somebody help us. Please." She shook Nick gently, her tears falling onto his shirt. "Stay with me, Nick. Don't leave me now." The hours crawled by, each second an eternity. Sharon tried everything, ripping her shirt to apply pressure to Nick's wound, searching for anything in the decrepit building that might help her stop the bleeding. But she was no doctor, and time was not on her side. Her fear of Jordan lingered. Every so often, Sharon would glance back at the older woman, still slumped against the wall but beginning to stir. "No," Sharon whispered, her voice trembling. She grabbed a rusted chain and wrapped it tighter around Jordan's wrists, securing her against the crumbling wall. "You're not going anywhere." Nick's journey to the hospital finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sharon heard the faint sound of approaching footsteps. A pair of hikers had stumbled upon the building, drawn by her cries for help. They called emergency services, and soon, paramedics arrived, lifting Nick onto a stretcher. Sharon refused to leave his side, holding his hand tightly as they loaded him into the ambulance. "You're going to be okay," she whispered through her tears. "I promise." The ride to the hospital was tense. Every bump in the road felt like another dagger twisting in Sharon's heart. But at last they arrived, and doctors rushed Nick into surgery. Sharon sat alone in the waiting room, her clothes stained with blood, her hands trembling as she replayed the night's events. Jordan's mysterious disappearance. While Sharon clung to hope in the hospital, the scene back at the warehouse took a startling turn. When police finally arrived to secure Jordan, they found nothing but empty chains. The woman who had caused so much pain and destruction had vanished, leaving no trace behind. Jordan's escape was no accident. She had planned for this, as she always did. The chain Sharon had so desperately tightened wasn't enough to hold someone as resourceful and cunning as Jordan. Hidden in her boot was a small tool, a lockpick she had smuggled in for moments like this. Even in the haze of her injuries, her survival instincts had kicked in. By the time the authorities arrived, Jordan was long gone, slipping into the shadows like a phantom. The return of the monster. News of Jordan's escape sent shockwaves through Sharon and her loved ones. They had hoped this ordeal was over, that justice would finally catch up to Jordan. But the woman who had tormented them for so long was still out there, watching, waiting, and plotting her next move. For Jordan, the night wasn't a complete failure. While Sharon and Nick had escaped, they hadn't won. Jordan had survived, and in her mind, survival was victory enough. She retreated to a safe house, nursing her wounds and biding her time. The thought of Sharon and Nick, happy and free, filled her with a burning rage. "They'll pay," she muttered to herself, her voice cold and resolute. "They'll all pay." A fragile piece back at the hospital, Nick emerged from surgery in critical but stable condition. Sharon wept with relief as she sat by his bedside, holding his hand. He was alive, and for now, that was all that mattered. But the shadow of Jordan's escape loomed over them like a storm cloud. Sharon couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. She had seen the look in Jordan's eyes, the unrelenting determination that refused to die. "She'll come back," Sharon whispered to Nick, even though he was still unconscious. "I know she will. But this time, we'll be ready." The cycle begins again. Jordan's escape wasn't just a twist of fate. It was a promise of things to come. She would return, stronger and more determined than ever. Her revenge would be calculated, ruthless, and devastating. Sharon and Nick had won the battle, but the war was far from over. For the audience, Jordan's escape opened the door to new possibilities, a villain reborn, a threat that would hang over the characters like a ticking time bomb. And as the story moved forward, one thing became clear: the nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning.